Imagine standing in a quiet hospital room. Fluorescent lights flicker overhead as life-changing events unfold before your very eyes. Outside, people bustle about in hushed urgency. But within these four walls, a storm of secrets and betrayal brews. The pregnant wife, pale and trembling, clutches the bed's rail, her faith in the world shattered. Across from her, a woman in designer heels, heartless laughter echoing against sterile tiles. A millionaire stands between them, torn by guilt, greed, and the seismic truth about to surface. Welcome to a tale where money, desire, and deception collide, and where one birth certificate will change everything. Thomas Harrington had always worn success like a well-tailored suit. Born into a modest family in Lansing, Michigan, he climbed the ladder of the tech industry with sheer tenacity. By the time he was 35, he had founded Harrington Innovations, a company that crafted medical software used by major hospitals, including St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital in Chicago. Thomas reveled in his reputation as one of the youngest self-made millionaires in the Midwestern tech scene. He was known for hosting lavish charity galas, driving sleek electric cars, and donating to children's hospitals acts that masked the ruthless ambition fueling his ascent. His wife, Julia Harrington, née Maxwell, was a quiet force of empathy and intellect. Julia had grown up in a loving home in Springfield, Illinois, where her father, Pastor James Maxwell, taught her the value of compassion. With a master's degree in social work, Julia had dedicated her life to helping underprivileged teens navigate mental health challenges. She was drawn to Thomas's magnetic confidence, while he was entranced by her gentle warmth. Despite their differences, they seemed the perfect complement to each other, forging a powerful alliance of heart and mind. Their wedding was the talk of the year, a fairy tale ceremony at a centuries-old chapel near Lake Michigan, attended by luminaries such as Dr. Robert Patterson of the University of Chicago Medical Center and philanthropic entrepreneurs like Sharon Blake from New York. Photographs of Julia's classic lace gown graced local newspapers. Behind her serene smile shone a resolute faith in Thomas and the future they would shape together. In the early years, the Harringtons embodied marital harmony. They shared laughter over morning coffee, walked hand-in-hand through the bustling streets of Chicago, and spent quiet evenings discussing ways to help the community. The darker sides of wealth and envy, the temptations had yet to cast their shadows. They were building a dream together, a dream where success was measured not just by financial gain, but by the positive change they could bring to others. Yet, as Thomas's fortune and influence grew, so did the demands on his time. Business meetings turned into high-stakes conferences at luxury resorts. Philanthropic events became stepping stones for networking rather than heartfelt missions. Julia continued her work at the youth center, trying to preserve normalcy, but she could sense a subtle shift in her husband. He was no longer the earnest man who once blushed when she teased him over a home-cooked meal. Flashes of arrogance crept into his demeanor, accompanied by an insatiable hunger for more and more success, more recognition, more power. Still, Julia clung to her belief that love could overcome any change. She reminded herself that they had weathered obstacles before, that their marriage stood on the bedrock of trust and shared dreams. Holding on to faith, she never suspected that while one life was blossoming within her, a more sinister seed of betrayal was being planted by someone else. It was a seed destined to take root in the most unexpected place. A hospital room where everything Julia knew about life, love, and loyalty would be called into question. Julia's pregnancy was a moment of unfiltered joy. She and Thomas had been trying for years, and the news finally arrived on a crisp autumn morning. She'd surprised him with a small baby onesie embroidered with the words, "Daddy's Little Dreamer," leaving Thomas speechless for the first time in his life. 4 days after, he showered her with genuine affection. Flowers at her office, nightly foot rubs, heartfelt whispers of excitement. This, she thought, was the glimmer of the man she'd fallen in love with, returning to her in full. But as the months progressed, the old demands closed in. Thomas's company was developing groundbreaking medical imaging software, which required frequent travel. Meetings in San Francisco bled into negotiations in New York, culminating in a presentation to a partner hospital in London. His calls to Julia became briefer, peppered with mentions of deadlines and demanding investors. When he was in town, Julia noticed the phone that never left his side, the hush calls he dismissed as client emergencies, the dinner plans he canceled last minute. Meanwhile, her body changed in ways both wondrous and taxing. Morning sickness came in waves at dawn, and she leaned over the bathroom sink, yearning for her husband's warm hand on her back. Each prenatal appointment brought her a burst of hope, listening to the rapid heartbeat of their growing baby, feeling the gentle kicks that reminded her of the life they had created. Though Julia fought to maintain a positive outlook, she couldn't ignore the undercurrent of loneliness creeping into her life. She was often left alone to spend sleepless nights reading baby-name books and planning a nursery that Thomas rarely found time to visit. At the youth center, she tried to preserve her focus on the teenagers who needed her guidance, but her mind often wandered. One day, a co-worker, Tamara Williams, asked Julia how she truly felt. Julia blinked away tears and forced a smile, insisting everything was fine. Tamara, who had also experienced a difficult pregnancy, recognized the bravado. She gently reminded Julia that self-care mattered, especially now. Despite the growing tension, Thomas tried to remain supportive in his own way. He occasionally texted sweet messages, "I can't wait to meet our little one," or "my two angels," but they felt more like scheduled gestures than spontaneous expressions of love. Julia told herself he was just stressed from the rigors of running a business on the cusp of a major breakthrough. She tried to understand, always rationalizing, always hoping that once the baby arrived, life would settle back into a comfortable rhythm. Yet beneath her reassuring words lay a nagging worry. Sometimes in the quiet hours of early morning, she would watch his sleeping form and recall how a single phone vibration could cause him to tense up. She wondered if there was more to his late-night schedule than meetings, and deadliness, fleeting suspicion, a restless doubt. She pushed it away, reminding herself that trust had always been their pillar. Little did she know that pillar was about to crack under the weight of an unspeakable secret. Cassandra Reed had a presence that turned heads, tall, with auburn hair cascading down a slender frame. She'd been born into a family of social climbers in New York City. Early on, she discovered her own flair for marketing and built a modest reputation by working with high-profile clients in the healthcare industry. Her introduction to Thomas happened at a conference in Manhattan where their paths intersected during a panel on cutting-edge medical software. Thomas initially saw Cassandra as a valuable business connection. She had the charm to sway potential investors, the knowledge to navigate complex negotiations, and the ambition that matched his own hunger for success. Their partnership began purely professional. She pitched marketing strategies to expand Harrington Innovations into untapped markets. Over late-night brainstorming sessions, they discussed how to position his software as an industry disruptor. Deals were made. Cocktails were shared. Laughter flowed. Soon, the boundaries that separated business from pleasure began to blur. It started with a few flirtatious texts. Cassandra's wry humor and fearless confidence entranced Thomas. She would throw playful jabs at his family man image, praising his success, but hinting that he needed to embrace the full potential of his desires. At first, Thomas resisted. He told himself it was harmless banter. But as weeks passed, he found her attention addictive. Her unwavering focus on him, her willingness to cater to his every whim, even if it was just a passing craving, made him feel powerful, young, and unbound by marital obligations. An after-party dinner in San Francisco became the tipping point. Fueled by the glow of a freshly inked contract, they celebrated at a plush rooftop bar. The city lights shimmered below, but neither Thomas nor Cassandra cared for the view. They only had eyes for each other. One glass of champagne led to another, and by midnight, they were locked in a passionate embrace in the back seat of a hired limousine. The next morning, guilt coiled around Thomas's throat like a serpent. but he stifled it with justifications. Julia would never know. This fling would fade once the workload lessened. It was just business, just pleasure, nothing more. Still, their affair deepened. Business trips turned into brief escapes. They dined at exclusive restaurants where Thomas's name would secure them private back rooms. Cassandra's laughter echoed off polished mahogany walls, an intoxicating counterpoint to Julia's gentle sincerity. Thomas convinced himself he had control of the situation. This was his life to lead, his desires to fulfill. If he worked hard enough, he could keep everything under wraps. Julia, the baby, and the mistress, who now felt indispensable to his professional success. Yet Cassandra's eyes glittered with something more than mere interest. She thrived on the thrill of tampering with another woman's territory and nursed an obsession with climbing social rungs. If Thomas's wealthy world was the prize, she was a relentless competitor, determined to seize every advantage. Beneath her sweet, seductive exterior, she was counting each step, waiting to make her next move. And that move would shatter more than just a marriage. Julia was never a woman to snoop. She respected personal space and believed trust to be the cornerstone of any marriage. But with her growing pregnancy bump and increasing loneliness, she felt a shift in Thomas's behavior that she could no longer explain away. She caught him muting calls from unknown numbers, glimpsed the ghost of a smile on his face whenever he tapped out text messages late at night. Whenever she asked about work, he'd be evasive, offering half answers and changing the topic with ease. One evening, as she sorted laundry in their penthouse laundry room, she found an unfamiliar perfume clinging to Thomas's dress shirt. The scent was rich and floral, nothing like her light lavender fragrance. Alarmed, she pressed the shirt to her nose, her gut twisted. She fought to push the dread away, to conjure a plausible explanation. Perhaps he'd brushed past a woman in a crowded elevator, or a colleague had embraced him in greeting. Still, doubt gnawed at her mind. Days later, while tidying up the living room, Julia stumbled upon a business card. Cassandra Reed, marketing consultant, embossed in gold. She didn't recognize the name, though something about the delicate script made her pulse quicken. The next time Thomas mentioned traveling to New York for a critical meeting, she caught a flicker of hesitation in his eyes, as if he were bracing for her questions. Yet Julia found herself unable to confront him directly. Part of her was afraid to confirm the horrifying suspicion that had begun to bloom in her heart. Instead, she sought solace in prayer and in conversations with her father, Pastor James Maxwell. He sensed her unrest through her quiet tone over the phone. Though she withheld the full extent of her fears, he knew enough to worry. He offered gentle advice, communication, patience, and the importance of love. But these words felt like a fragile bandage over a wound that ran deeper with each passing day. Julia was torn between preserving her husband's image and preserving her own sanity. Meanwhile, Thomas wrestled with a different type of guilt. The baby's due date inched closer, and every ultrasound photo Julia showed him tugged at his conscience. He recognized her vulnerability, saw the love in her eyes, but Cassandra's pull proved equally strong. The mistress symbolized not just forbidden desire, but also a level of excitement and professional synergy that he told himself he needed to maintain his edge. On several occasions, he nearly ended the affair, only to falter when Cassandra whispered assurances of unconditional devotion and strategic business tips that promised to bolster his fortune. As the weeks wore on, the space between Thomas and Julia expanded into a chasm. She buried her worries in decorating the nursery, painting pastel yellow walls to herald brighter days. He drowned his conflicts in grand business announcements, signing contracts worth millions, convincing himself that this success would somehow justify his duplicity. Neither realized that time was running out and that a reckoning loomed on the horizon. It wasn't just the present swirling with secrets. Thomas carried scars from his own childhood that he'd never fully revealed to Julia. Growing up in Lansing, his parents had divorced when he was a teenager. His father, Richard Harrington, was an entrepreneur with an erratic moral compass, notorious for lavish spending and fleeting romantic conquests. Thomas's mother, Linda, tried to keep the family stable, but her heartbreak eventually led to a breakdown that left young Thomas struggling to create order out of chaos. In his youth, Thomas vowed never to walk in his father's footsteps. He promised to build a life different from the toxic environment he'd escaped. Yet, as an adult, with success fueling his ego, he found himself repeating the pattern. He recognized the reflection of his father in the mirror each time he laughed with Cassandra, ignoring the ring on his finger. It unsettled him, stirring a latent fear that he too was doomed to destroy the people he loved. Julia knew fragments of Thomas's past, but not the full extent of the emotional debris he carried. She wondered what made him so fiercely ambitious, so desperate to prove his worth. She credited his drive to a love for innovation and a desire to help others through technology. In truth, Thomas was haunted by a determination to outrun poverty and heartbreak, even if it meant sacrificing his integrity. During one of Cassandra's visits to Chicago, they dined at the Galena Club, an upscale restaurant frequented by the city's elite. Over candlelight, Cassandra probed into Thomas's childhood, curious about the man behind the millionaire facade. Perhaps she thought sharing personal stories might deepen their connection. Or maybe she sensed a vulnerability she could exploit. Thomas, after a few drinks, confessed bits of his father's infidelities, the neglect, the pain. Cassandra's eyes lit with an odd satisfaction, as though learning about his fractured past gave her more power over him. Soon after, Cassandra dangled a new marketing concept for Harrington Innovations. She wanted to brand Thomas as the bold visionary with an empathetic edge, a man of unwavering moral standards who was transforming medical technology for the greater good. The irony wasn't lost on him, yet he nodded, caught in her orbit, tethered by a mix of lust, ambition, and self-loathing. At home, Julia sensed something changing in her husband's demeanor, a conflicted energy that accompanied him wherever he went. She tried once more to break the silence. Late one night, she set a romantic dinner, lighting soft candles and cooking his favorite dish, garlic butter salmon. She mustered the courage to ask, "Thomas, is there something you want to tell me?" He stiffened, forcing a smile. "Julia, it's just work stress. The new product launch is enormous." He leaned across the table, pecking her on the cheek. "I love you. You know that, right?" Those words echoed emptily in Julia's mind as they cleared the plates in silence. She couldn't decide which was more painful, the possibility that he was lying or the fear that he might no longer recognize his own truths. Julia's final weeks of pregnancy arrived in a rush of swelling ankles and late-night cravings. She set up the nursery with pastel blankets and stuffed animals, ignoring the gnawing voice inside her that suspected Thomas was drifting further away. Even so, she tried to stay positive, focusing on the child who would soon grace their world with newborn cries and hopeful eyes. Then came the night when unexpected labor pains seized her. It was 3 weeks before her due date, and Thomas was in Boston finalizing a partnership. Julia doubled over in agony at home, her phone clattering to the kitchen floor. Panicked, she called Tamara Williams, who wasted no time speeding over and rushing Julia to St. Catherine's Memorial Hospital. En route, Julia tried calling Thomas, but her calls went straight to voicemail. At the hospital, doctors confirmed that labor had started prematurely, likely triggered by stress or fatigue. Julia's mind raced with fear for her baby's health, for her marriage, and for the uncertain future that loomed large in the background. Yet, she breathed through the contractions, telling herself to stay strong. Nurses settled her into a private birthing suite, hooking her up to monitors and offering reassurances that they would do everything possible to ensure a safe delivery. Sometime around midnight, Thomas burst through the doors, hair disheveled, tie askew, eyes wild with worry. He had booked the first flight out of Boston the moment he received Tamara's frantic text. Rushing to Julia's side, he grasped her hand, whispering apologies and promises of a stable future. For a fleeting moment, all her suspicions melted at the sight of him, trembling in genuine concern. She allowed herself to believe that things might be okay. Then, As the contractions intensified and the delivery drew near, an unsettling presence tiptoed into the corridor. Cassandra Reed had arrived at the hospital. Exactly how she knew Julia was in labor remained a mystery, whether she had tracked Thomas's flight, hacked into some scheduling system, or simply used her marketing connections to glean personal information. What mattered was that she was there, her sophisticated heels clicking on the polished floor. Thomas, unaware, remained at Julia's side, stroking her sweat-dampened hair, encouraging her through each contraction. But outside the room, Cassandra prowled like a lioness, circling its prey, peering through the small window to watch the scene unfold. Nurses gave her curious glances, but she flashed a confident smile, claiming she was a family friend here to offer support. She waited, a glint of anticipation in her eyes. The tension in the air was palpable as Julia's labor progressed. Yet beneath the beeping monitors and the doctor's calm instructions, another drama was about to unfold, one that had nothing to do with the miracle of childbirth and everything to do with betrayal. And in just a few hours' time, that betrayal would become as undeniable as the newborn's first piercing wail. At 4 a.m., Julia's contractions reached their peak. Nurses whisked her into the delivery room, Thomas at her side, heart pounding in unison with the frantic beep of medical equipment. As Julia screamed through a particularly agonizing wave of pain, Thomas whispered through clenched teeth, "You can do this, baby. Stay with me." Julia's eyes brimmed with tears, part pain, part relief that he was there, part fear that the illusions holding their life together might soon crumble. Meanwhile, Cassandra lingered just beyond the threshold, ears straining to catch every cry, every snippet of conversation that escaped from within. The adrenaline coursing through her veins felt electric. She had gambled everything when she boarded a late-night flight to Chicago, determined to stake her claim in Thomas's world. Watching him support his wife, tears of desperation in his eyes, fueled a strange mix of jealousy and triumph in Cassandra. She believed she knew Thomas in ways Julia never could, that his love for Julia was an artifact of the past, while their relationship was the future. Suddenly, the door burst open and a nurse rushed out, nearly colliding with Cassandra. The nurse apologized in a hurry, searching for additional supplies. Seizing the moment, Cassandra stepped forward, glancing inside the room. The sight that greeted her was raw and intimate. Julia, drenched in sweat, hair plastered to her face, clutching Thomas's hand in an almost vice-like grip. Thomas's expression was torn between dread and elation. The power of that moment should have been a warning to Cassandra, a reminder of the unbreakable bond forged when two people usher a new life into the world. But Cassandra dismissed the notion. She saw only an opening, a final opportunity to push her advantage. With a smirk, she turned and walked toward the waiting area. She sent a single text to Thomas, "I'm here in case you need me." Then she waited, crossing her legs as she scrolled through her social media feed, radiating confidence. She knew eventually Thomas would see the message. And in that brief instant of shock, his world would tilt on its axis. Back in the delivery room, Julia mustered every bit of strength she had. After what felt like an eternity, the baby was born a boy with a lusty cry that echoed through the halls. Julia collapsed against the pillows, tears of joy and exhaustion staining her cheeks. Thomas trembled, looking at his son as though witnessing a miracle. He cut the umbilical cord, voice shaking. "We did it, Julia. We have a son." For a few precious minutes, time stood still. Their child, named Michael, in honor of Julia's late grandfather, was perfect. The doctor pronounced him healthy, despite arriving a bit early. Thomas gathered Michael into his arms, heart swelling with a love so fierce it nearly obliterated his guilt. Nearly, but not completely, because once he laid Michael in Julia's arms, his phone vibrated. Glancing down, he saw Cassandra's name on the screen, and in that moment, a cold jolt of reality crashed back in. She was here. Julia marveled at the new life cradled in her arms, feeling a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. Her son's tiny fingers curled around her thumb, and for a moment the world outside that hospital room ceased to exist. But then she noticed Thomas checking his phone, his face clouding with an expression that made her heart drop. She followed his gaze to the door window, where a figure disappeared into the hallway. "Thomas," she murmured, voice hoarse from hours of labor. Who was that? His breath caught, and he struggled to conjure a lie. Instead, he let out a sigh. "It's someone from work," he said. "They followed me here for some urgent updates. I'll handle it." But it was too late. Julia recognized the woman's silhouette, that cascade of auburn hair, the sharp lines of her jaw. She recalled the business card she'd found, Cassandra Reed. Horror and heartbreak flooded her simultaneously as she realized the truth. This was no coincidence, no innocuous business visit. She turned her focus back to her baby, wishing she could shield him from the ugliness that threatened to invade this moment. A nurse walked in and gently guided Michael into a bassinet for routine checks. Julia seized the opportunity to confront Thomas. "Why is she here?" she demanded, voice trembling with fatigue and anger. "Tell me the truth, Thomas. I deserve that much." Thomas looked trapped, a deer in headlights. The panic on his face was answer enough, but Julia waited, each second tightening the knot at her chest. His next words spilled out in fragments. "Julia, I never wanted to hurt you. It was just business at first. Mistakes were made." Julia's lips parted, but no sound emerged. She tried to steady her breathing, recalling the labor pains that had racked her body only an hour ago. Anger rose like bile in her throat, warring with disbelief. She thought of all the nights he'd come home late, reeking of that unfamiliar perfume, the suspicious text messages. Now it all made sense. She felt a nauseating sense of betrayal. Suddenly, the door swung open and Cassandra, emboldened by the tension, sauntered inside. Without waiting for an invitation, she perched on a nearby chair. "So, you finally told her?" she asked, arching an eyebrow at Thomas. Julia clenched the bed sheets in her fists, her face pale, eyes shining with tears. Before Thomas could respond, Cassandra turned her gaze to Julia. "I know you're not in a state to talk, but we really do need to figure things out. Thomas and I." Julia's composure shattered. "Get out," she hissed, voice cracking. "This is my child's first day in this world. And you," she shot a furious glance at Thomas, "you both dare to bring this ugliness here?" For a second, Cassandra looked taken aback, but then she smirked as though enjoying the drama. "I'm not going anywhere," she declared. "Not until we've settled things." That was the moment Julia realized this betrayal ran deeper than she'd feared. The mistress had strolled into the sacred space of motherhood, wearing her defiance like a trophy, and Thomas stood there, cornered by shame and indecision. The fragile peace they had clung to was about to rupture irreparably. The hours that followed were a blur of tears, accusations, and white-hot rage. Nurses attempted to keep the space calm for Julia's sake, urging Thomas to handle the situation outside the room. But Cassandra stood her ground, batting away their requests with the entitlement she had long honed in her climb to social prestige. Julia finally demanded the nurse station call security if Cassandra refused to leave. Thomas, torn between preventing a public scene and acknowledging the chaos he'd unleashed, took Cassandra into the hallway. His voice shook as he hissed, "What are you doing here? This isn't the time or place." She scoffed. "I have a right to be here, Thomas. We have a future together, don't we? Or are you planning to just walk away now that your wife's given birth?" Her eyes glittered with a dangerous intensity. Inside the room, Julia tried to focus on baby Michael, on the sweet smell of his newborn skin. But the confrontation right outside the door was impossible to ignore. Heart hammering, she squeezed her eyes shut, praying for strength. Her father's words echoed in her mind. Love can heal if it's genuine. But in that moment, she wondered if this love, hers for Thomas, had been a naive dream. Eventually, the hospital security arrived, and Cassandra was escorted off the maternity floor, livid and sputtering threats of legal repercussions and exposing everything. But Thomas convinced them not to press charges, promising he'd handle her. Julia watched from the window, numb with shock, her world unrecognizable. Later, a solemn hush descended in the hospital room as a nurse brought in the official paperwork for the birth certificate. The nurse smiled, congratulating the new parents, oblivious to the turmoil churning beneath the surface. She pointed to the designated lines where they should fill in their names: mother, father, and the baby's name. Julia hesitated, pen hovering above the form. She glanced at Thomas, tears brimming. "Should I even list you as the father?" she whispered, her voice cracking. It was a devastating question, one that sliced through Thomas like a blade. "I'm his father," he answered, trying to mask the tremor in his voice. "You know that, don't you?" A flicker of doubt crossed Julia's face. The possibility that Thomas might not be Michael's father unthinkable, but suddenly plausible amid the twisted revelations. "Thomas, how long has this been going on?" she asked, referencing the affair that now overshadowed their lives. Thomas lowered his head, unable to meet her gaze. "Almost a year," he confessed, voice barely audible. "But I swear the baby is mine. I've never strayed from you physically until Cassandra. Please, Julia, don't punish our son for my mistakes." Julia's heart clenched. A year, an entire year of deception during which she had carried his child, dreamed of the life they would have as a family. Anguish warred with maternal instinct, but in the end, her love for Michael took precedence. With trembling hands, she wrote Thomas's name on the birth certificate. The nurse, sensing the tension, quietly collected the document and exited. In the next room, a muffled shout from the hallway signaled that Cassandra hadn't truly gone away. The newly signed certificate felt like a fragile promise of fatherhood, of accountability that might shatter before it even had a chance to bind them together. The morning after Julia's world collapsed should have begun with peace. A new mother should be basking in the quiet joy of holding her baby, her heart full and hopeful. But instead, Julia awoke in the hospital to the heavy ache of betrayal and a silence more suffocating than the labor pain she'd endured. Michael lay sleeping in the bassinet beside her, blissfully unaware of the storm swirling outside his little cocoon. Julia sat propped against the pillows, arms crossed tightly over her chest, unable to erase the image of Cassandra's smug face in her room, seated like she belonged there, like she had some claim over this sacred space. And Thomas, he had let her in. Julia had sent him away the night before. Her voice had trembled with fury and exhaustion, but her words were clear: leave. And he had, but not for long. By 8 a.m., a soft knock came at the door. "Mrs. Harrington," a nurse said gently, "your husband, he's downstairs. There's someone else with him. She says she needs to speak with him. Should we ask her to leave?" Julia didn't respond right away. She wanted to scream. Yes. She wanted to demand that Cassandra be escorted from the building, from the city, from her life. But she also knew this confrontation needed to happen. She needed to see what kind of man Thomas was now, how he would handle the fire he had set. "Let them talk," she whispered. "But not here. Not near my son." The nurse nodded and left quietly. Down in the visitor's lounge, Thomas sat across from Cassandra, his posture tight, knuckles white against the armrest. Cassandra, by contrast, was perfectly poised, her silk blouse pressed, her lipstick untouched. She didn't look like a woman grieving the loss of a relationship. She looked like a strategist, a woman ready to negotiate her terms. "You really thought I'd just disappear, didn't you?" she said calmly, crossing her legs. "You thought after everything, I'd just slip back into the shadows and let you play devoted husband?" Thomas exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. "Cassandra, this isn't the place. Julia just gave birth. Our son is upstairs." "Your son," Cassandra corrected, eyes gleaming. "Funny how you say that with such confidence when you don't even know if this she placed a manicured hand over her stomach is also yours." Thomas swallowed hard. "I told you we'll get the test done, but I won't make decisions based on threats." Cassandra leaned in, her voice dropping. "Then let me remind you what's at stake. I have photos, messages, screenshots every moment of our affair documented. If I don't get what I deserve, financial support, a public acknowledgement, access, I promise you, Thomas, you'll be front page news by Monday morning." Again, Thomas sat back, eyes burning. What you deserve is consequences. You came to the hospital uninvited. You humiliated my wife. You disrespected my son's first moments of life. You think that earns you a seat at the table? I think I've already earned it, she said, smug. You just haven't accepted it yet. Upstairs, Julia cradled Michael, her emotions simmering beneath her skin. She imagined Thomas's face as he listened to Cassandra's venom. Was he defending her, protecting what little remained of their marriage? Or was he still caught in that gravitational pull Cassandra seemed to wield so effortlessly? After 30 agonizing minutes, Thomas returned, his shoulders sagging with defeat. He stepped inside Julia's hospital room quietly, his gaze dropping to the floor. She's gone, he said softly. For now, Julia replied, but not for good. He nodded, knowing she was right. I told her we'll get the paternity test. He added, I also told her I'm done letting her manipulate me. Julia didn't respond. Her attention remained fixed on Michael, who stirred gently in her arms. Thomas moved closer, stopping at the edge of the bed. I want to fix this, Julia. You can't, she said, her voice calm but final. This isn't a crack you can patch up with good intentions. You brought destruction into our home, into this moment, into him. Thomas swallowed hard. I know, but I want to try. I want to be better for him. For you. Julia looked up, her eyes glassy but fierce. Then start by understanding this. You may have shared in his creation, but I'm the one protecting him now. You have a lot to prove, Thomas. Not with words, with choices. He nodded, unable to say more. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be paved with forgiveness. It would be paved with penance. As he left the room, Julia pressed a kiss to Michael's forehead, whispering a quiet prayer not for a marriage, not for Thomas, but for clarity and for the strength to choose the life she and her son deserved, whether Thomas fit into it or not. Julia had always pictured the first days of motherhood as sacred, cradling her newborn son in the soft light of morning, her husband by her side, their hearts full of awe and tenderness. But as she sat in a hospital bed, nursing baby Michael under the sterile fluorescent glow, that vision felt like a cruel joke. The real Thomas, the one who stood across the room, pale and silent, had torn it apart, and now she was left with the shrapnel. He had just told her the truth, or at least the part he couldn't hide anymore. Cassandra Reed was pregnant, and there was a strong chance the baby was his. Julia stared at him for what felt like an eternity. Her lips parted in disbelief. How could you? She finally whispered, her voice barely audible over Michael's quiet coos. Thomas didn't answer right away. His hands hung at his sides, helpless, empty. I made a mistake, he murmured. A terrible, selfish mistake. Julia laughed, a short, bitter sound that didn't feel like her at all. You don't say. She looked down at the tiny face in her arms. Michael's skin was impossibly soft. His fingers curled into gentle fists. Her baby, her miracle. And yet, even in this sacred moment, the past clawed its way in, threatening to poison everything. I gave you everything, Thomas, she said, her eyes still on Michael. My heart, my trust, my future. And while I was growing your son inside of me, you were out building a second life. Thomas took a step forward, and Julia instinctively pulled Michael closer. Don't, she said sharply. Not right now. He froze. I want to understand something, she said, her voice steadier now, cold and cutting. Why her? Why during my pregnancy? Wasn't there enough between us? Wasn't this, she glanced down at Michael, enough? Thomas ran a hand through his hair, exhaling like he'd been holding his breath for days. I don't know how to explain it. I was overwhelmed. You were changing. Everything was changing, and I felt like I was being left behind. Julia blinked. So instead of growing with me, you escaped into her. I didn't mean for it to go that far, but it did. Far enough that now she's claiming to carry your child, she snapped. Thomas flinched. We're doing a paternity test. Nothing is confirmed yet. Julia shook her head. Confirmation isn't the point. You betrayed me in the most vulnerable time of my life, and now you've brought another woman's crisis into my son's birth. A long silence followed. Only Michael's soft breaths filled the space between them. Finally, Julia spoke again. You need to leave. Thomas looked stunned. Julia, please don't do this." She met his gaze with calm resolve. "You don't get to ask me for anything right now. I just gave birth. I'm in pain. I'm exhausted. And I'm trying to keep myself from breaking apart. So please go." He opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time since they met, Thomas Harrington didn't have a rebuttal. He walked to the edge of the bed, hesitating. "I love you," he whispered. Julia looked away. "Then you should have protected us." Thomas turned and left the room, the door clicking shut behind him like the final punctuation of a sentence she never wanted to hear. Alone, Julia sank back against the pillows, her arms still wrapped around Michael. She kissed his forehead, letting a single tear fall onto his downy hair. "I'll protect you," she whispered, rocking him gently, "even if I have to do it alone." Across the city, Thomas returned to the penthouse he used to share with Julia. It was quiet, impossibly quiet. The walls echoed with memories, the sound of her laughter in the kitchen, the hum of lullabies she used to sing in the evenings. He walked past the nursery they had designed together. The mobile spun slowly above the crib, untouched. And for the first time in his life, Thomas understood what it meant to be truly alone. The illusion of the perfect life he had built, the wife, the success, the child had shattered, and all that remained was a man brought low by his own choices, unsure if the damage he caused could ever be repaired. 2 weeks had passed since Julia gave birth to her son Michael, and 2 weeks since her world shattered beneath her. Instead of returning to the penthouse she once called home, Julia moved into the quiet safety of her father's parsonage on the south side of Chicago. It was a modest, peaceful place filled with family photos, well-worn books, and the scent of coffee always brewing in the kitchen. For now, it was a sanctuary. Pastor James Maxwell, her father, became her anchor. He helped rock Michael when the newborn cried through the night and warmed bottles with a gentleness that belied the sternness of his pulpit presence. More importantly, he never pushed Julia to talk before she was ready. He simply sat with her during the long hours when grief settled into her bones, listening without judgment. Each night, when the house fell quiet and Michael finally slept, Julia allowed herself to cry. The tears weren't just for Thomas's betrayal. They were for the life she thought they were building, for the nursery that now stood empty, for the vows that had once felt sacred and now rang hollow. Meanwhile, Thomas's world was crumbling in a different way. Back in his penthouse, Thomas found no solace in the sweeping city views or the sleek furniture. Everything reminded him of Julia. Her laughter in the kitchen, her soft footsteps in the hallway, the ultrasound photos once proudly displayed on the refrigerator. Now only silence remained. He barely left the apartment. A rotating crew of legal advisors and crisis managers filled his days, trying to keep his name out of scandal columns. Cassandra's threats had intensified. She had promised to leak personal messages, photos, and even sensitive business files if Thomas didn't do right by her. Her demands were growing bolder by the day. Public acknowledgement, financial compensation, and a permanent role in his life. Thomas had no idea if Cassandra's claim about her pregnancy was real, but he couldn't ignore the risk. If she truly was carrying his child, the ramifications would be catastrophic for his marriage, for his reputation, for his company. A week later, a letter arrived, written by Julia. It was short, direct, and heavy with restrained emotion. In it, she made her position clear. She had retained an attorney and was pursuing legal separation. She needed time and space to determine if their marriage was worth salvaging. If Thomas wanted a chance to rebuild, it would require complete honesty, full accountability, and a commitment not only to her, but to Michael. "You may be Michael's father," she wrote, "but that doesn't make you a father. That's a role you'll have to earn. One sleepless night, one decision, one truth at a time." Thomas read the letter 3 times, his hands trembling. For the first time in weeks, the noise of public scrutiny faded into the background, replaced by something more devastating. The realization that he had broken not just Julia's heart, but the very foundation of his family. He called Cassandra the next day, his voice cold and firm. "We're doing a paternity test. I don't want promises. I want facts." Cassandra agreed, too quickly for Thomas's comfort. A clinic appointment was scheduled for the following week. Both legal teams would be present to oversee the process. The wait would be agonizing, but necessary. As the scandal simmered, Julia kept her circle tight. Tamara visited daily to help with Michael, bringing over home-cooked meals and quiet support. Julia returned to her faith, reading scripture each morning before sunrise, sometimes with Michael asleep against her chest. She still couldn't understand how everything had gone so wrong so fast, but she was beginning to understand her own strength. The first results from the paternity screening came back 10 days later. Though not conclusive, the initial findings pointed to a high probability that Thomas was, in fact, the father of Cassandra's child. The final confirmation would take a few more weeks. When Julia received the news, she didn't cry. She didn't rage. She simply folded the report, placed it in her drawer, and sat silently beside Michael's crib. This was her new reality, a reality built on truth, not illusion. She watched her son sleep, his tiny chest rising and falling, and whispered a promise. You will grow up surrounded by love, and nothing, not betrayal, not lies, will touch your light. Across the city, Thomas stared at the same report with shaking hands. The weight of his double life had finally landed fully on his shoulders. There was no more running, no more rationalizing, only consequences. The subsequent weeks felt like an eternity. Thomas threw himself into therapy, confronting the destructive patterns he'd inherited and perpetuated. He started a journal, pouring out the guilt and shame he'd carried for so long, not just about Cassandra, but about the man he had become. He respected Julia's need for space, communicating only through their lawyers regarding Michael's well-being and visitation, which Julia cautiously allowed under her father's supervision. He never missed a scheduled visit, arriving with a humility that surprised even Pastor Maxwell. He learned to change diapers, to soothe Michael's cries, to simply sit and hold his son, marveling at the tiny life he had almost irrevocably damaged. Then, the final, conclusive paternity test results for Cassandra's pregnancy arrived. Thomas's lawyer called him first. He braced for the worst, his heart pounding. Thomas, his lawyer said, a note of something unreadable in his voice, the results are definitive. You're not the father. A wave of shock, then an almost disbelieving relief, washed over Thomas. It turned out Cassandra had engaged in a brief, reckless fling around the same time her affair with Thomas had begun, a detail she'd conveniently omitted. Her carefully constructed web of manipulation began to unravel. Faced with irrefutable proof and the threat of legal action for defamation and extortion from Thomas's reinvigorated legal team, Cassandra Reed vanished from their lives as quickly as she had appeared, her ambitions thwarted, her schemes exposed. When Julia received the news, a complex mix of emotions surfaced. There was relief, certainly, that another child wouldn't be caught in this crossfire. But the core betrayal remained. Thomas had still been unfaithful. He had still lied. Yet, a tiny, fragile seed of hope, one she hadn't dared to nurture, began to sprout. Thomas hadn't created another family, but he had undeniably broken theirs. Over the next year, Thomas worked tirelessly, not just at his company, but on himself. He sold the opulent penthouse, a symbol of his old life, and moved into a more modest home closer to Julia and Michael. He continued therapy, made genuine amends where he could, and poured his energy into being a present, reliable father. He never pressured Julia, understanding that her forgiveness was not his to demand, but something he had to earn day by painstaking day. Julia, too, found healing. She focused on Michael, on her work, and on rebuilding her own sense of self. She saw Thomas's efforts, his quiet consistency, the genuine remorse in his eyes when he looked at her and their son. Slowly, cautiously, the wall around her heart began to soften. They started with coffee, then quiet dinners after Michael was asleep, supervised by Pastor Maxwell, who, with a discerning eye, watched for true change. They talked for hours, not about blame, but about understanding, about the wounds of the past and the hopes for the future. 2 years after Michael's birth, on a warm spring afternoon in the small garden behind Pastor Maxwell's parsonage, Thomas, with tears in his eyes, asked Julia to renew their vows. It wasn't a grand gesture, but a quiet, heartfelt plea. Julia, her own eyes glistening, said yes. Their second ceremony was small, attended only by close family and friends who had witnessed their painful journey and their resilient path toward healing. Michael, now a toddling, giggling boy, served as the ring bearer, his innocent joy a testament to the love that had, against all odds, endured and been reborn, stronger and more honest than before. Their family was not perfect, but it was real, built on the hard-won truths of forgiveness, commitment, and the enduring power of a love that refused to be extinguished. Thank you for joining me on this harrowing journey of love, betrayal, and the unexpected twist that can forever change our lives. If this story gripped your heart and kept you on the edge of your seat, and if you're as happy about this beautiful resolution as I am, please don't forget to show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with friends who love a real-life drama unraveling with a hopeful ending, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. Your subscription helps me continue bringing you stories that both captivate and caution, illuminating the shadows and celebrating the light that can emerge. Let's keep exploring the resilience of the human spirit, how we break, how we heal, and how we fight for what truly matters. So stay connected, stay curious, and remember, sometimes the greatest twists in life are written in the most unexpected places, like a hospital birth certificate, and can lead to the most beautiful new beginnings. Subscribe now for more stories that dare to reveal life's deepest secrets and its most profound redemptions.